I'm delighted to be able to invite our keynote speaker, to introduce our keynote speaker, who those of you who have been attending for the past 2 days already know, Stephanie Wright from Mozilla Science Lab. Stephanie Wright leads the Mozilla Science Lab, a program of the Mozilla Foundation. Her work at Mozilla focuses on making publicly funded research more open, collaborative, and beneficial by maximizing access. She works with researchers, students, nonprofit organizations, librarians, and citizen scientists to help them learn, teach, and advocate for open science. Current activities include hosting events such as the Working Open workshops, wow, and open leadership trainings, developing educational resources such as the Open Data Training Program, and building a community of leaders through Mozilla's Fellowships and other collaborative opportunities. Prior to Mozilla, Stephanie worked for the University of Washington, where she developed and led the library's Research Data Services unit, served as a Senior Data Science Fellow at UW's, do they say UW about Washington, or is that? They do, okay. UW. Thank you, I knew I said that wrong. A Senior Data Science Fellow at UW's eScience Institute, and co-authored the Librarian Outreach Kit as part of the Community Engagement and Outreach Working Group for Data One. Please note that after her address and some questions and answers, we will announce this year's winner of the Schulenberger Award. I hope you'll join us to honor the recipient and enjoy both the short presentation and reception to follow. So Stephanie, first, will present a keynote address entitled, "The Role of Open in Higher Education, Are We Ready for a Revolution?" I can read it here, you can read it behind me. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Wright.
So I'm really thrilled, actually, that I recognize most of the faces that are in this crowd, because we spent the last 2 days together. So thank you, all of you, for, number one, putting up with me for 2 days and learning GitHub. Number two, for sticking around even after that and listening to me go on a little bit more about open. I feel like I need to give you a confession. When I was asked to provide this keynote, I really did struggle with what to talk about that might be of interest to people whose job descriptions, unlike mine, don't revolve around supporting and training folks in open best practices. As was mentioned in the introduction, I have a background in academia. I want to assure you, I do remember working there. I remember what it was like. I remember the challenges. I worked there for at the University of Washington Libraries for 20 years, over 20 years, oh my gosh. Before leaving 2 years ago to join Mozilla to lead their open data program and to become an open data advocate. My last 5 years at the University of Washington was spent working with researchers and students in all disciplines across all our campuses to develop data sharing programs and services, so much like what I think Jameen does here for you at KU. I remember the challenges that I heard in my conversations with those researchers. This is where I am now. I love it, it's awesome. Not that I didn't love University of Washington, I loved it, it was awesome, I was there for 20 years. But my views of those challenges were seriously expanded as I spent the last 2 years working with the researchers, nonprofit orgs, all those people that were just mentioned around the world supporting this mission, which isn't a small mission, to keep the internet open and accessible to all in perpetuity, we think big, and supporting the mission of the Mozilla Science Lab. So luckily for me, after I was asked to come give this presentation and before I got here, I happened to have a stroke of good luck when I came across this book that was written by Kathy Davidson. Kathy Davidson happens to be a member of the Mozilla board. She is also the director of the Futures Initiatives in CUNY, New York. The subtitle is the part that really caught my eye: How to Revolutionize the University for a World in Flux. Flux is a good way of putting it. I was only about 2 chapters in when I decided this is what I wanted to talk with you all about. So I'm going to ask you all to bear with me for just a little bit while I impart some history that explains the basis for this book as well as the title. So So this gentleman right here, his name is Charles Eliot. How many of you have heard of Charles Eliot? No judgment. Okay, a few of you. I had heard the name, but I didn't know who he was until I read the book. Charles Eliot became the president of Harvard in the late 1860s. Before he did that, he published an essay that was titled The New Education. He attended Harvard as a student, but upon graduating in 1853, he found that the training he'd received there really did not prepare him for the world of industrialized America. It was focused on Latin and Greek and mathematics. It was really geared towards those who were training to become ministers and thought provokers. He used some inheritance money from his grandfather to travel to Europe and gain a better understanding of the higher education systems that were there. And he went all over from country to country, really talking to the different university leaders in those places to find out how their higher education system was structured. He wanted to understand, and he did, based on those travels, and put down in the essay how American universities needed to change in order to prepare students to be trained as managers and factory workers, the needs, the positions that were needed in that age, in that day and age, and not the ministers, the farmers, and the theologists that were previously the previous audiences for those universities. Over his tenure as Harvard University president, he put in place many of the systems that, believe it or not, we still see in our system of higher education now. The organization of the university into disciplines and departments, that was Charles Eliot. Student credit hours, Charles Eliot. Even pieces of the tenure and promotion system that we're still using 150 years later. The way we educate and assess students and also assess that learning is taking place, for the most part, resemble what Charles Eliot put in place 150 years ago. And much of what we teach is geared toward a depth of knowledge and a specialization, rather than breadth in thinking and understanding of the larger context and the world around us. All right. You can probably guess, you're all very learned folks, what this slide is about. It relates to one particular topic that you probably hear on a regular basis these days. Climate change, right? There are multiple aspects to today's grand challenges that face us. They are complex. You can't go a day anymore without hearing, especially lately, about climate change. Most of it isn't necessarily about atmospheric science and weather, like the hurricanes that are in the southeast. There's also the oyster industry in Oregon that is suffering because of ocean acidification. There's the changing crop seasons in the Midwest. There's the cost and availability of drinking water in the Southwest, urban planning, energy production, the spread of new diseases. All of these are related to climate change. And there are so many complex problems facing our world today that cross so many disciplines. Climate change is just one of them. It's, I believe, the height of hubris for any one person to believe that only what they know and what they know alone could solve the problems that are facing us these days. Similarly, it's actually pretty hubristic to believe that one discipline even has all the answers to a particular problem. Thankfully, we're seeing a lot of high-profile innovations taking place in academic and research centers where researchers from different areas with different experiences and expertise come together to share with each other and to advance knowledge in a way that is bigger than what they could do on their own. These centers were created with the understanding that students and researchers need to understand beyond their specific area of expertise and their specific area of focus for their research to really have the impact that they want it to have. Now, all that being said, sadly, just as politics today has become divisive, we have allowed, I believe, within the institution of higher education, even aided and abetted, I would say, a divisiveness among the disciplines. And instead of using our incentive opportunities to support, encourage, and reward sharing of knowledge and resources across academic institutions, we incentivize in the opposite direction. The current tenure and promotion system, and I'm sorry for those of you that were in our workshop for the last 2 days where we've already talked about this, but I'm going to talk about it again. The current tenure and promotion system does not provide for that kind of support. Tenure and promotion focuses on the achievement of the individual rather than the impact of contributions to the whole. It rewards the lone wolf when working on his or her own and sharing when research is complete, rather than collaborating and sharing knowledge that at the beginning of the research process to achieve what might be even greater advances. As I was writing this, it occurred to me how very strange it is that we put a lot of time and effort into training our children through elementary school and onward to share and help one another, but when they get to college and get to adulthood, we incentivize them in the opposite direction. We need to support and reward those who are receptive to others' perspectives and experience. The tenure and promotion process needs to reward faculty in the same way that universities should be rewarding students for sharing ideas, trying something new, for iterating, reiterating, testing, experimenting, remixing, adjusting, retesting, going on continuously. We're supposed to be training the next generation to be better leaders and change makers, to bring about new innovations, to grow, not just to be taught to adapt to the world that they were given. As such, we shouldn't be educating them in the same way we were educating when the current system was designed. Again, 150 years ago. This slide gives you a picture of how we identify open science in Mozilla and all the different components that fall underneath it. The sharing collaboration I've been talking about is at the core of what we call in Mozilla working open best practices. This slide is focusing on open science, but it really is applicable to something broader that you could call open research or open scholarship in general. These practices are focused on making research collaborative, accessible, participatory, transdisciplinary, flexible, and adaptable to the fast-paced nature of the world that we're living in right now. Practices that incorporate soft skills training into the curriculum that allow for different students with different life experiences and abilities to learn and grow into the diverse group of world leaders that we're going to need. One of the greatest aspects of the internet, and indeed the primary reason for why it was invented, was its collaborative functionality. Sadly, in most early attempts to integrate it into education, many focused on teaching the same way we always have, just using the internet to do it. So think about MOOCs, and I would de-jargonize this and explain what MOOC stands for, but I always forget the first O. It's multi-something open course, what? Massive open online course. Thank you. I always forget what those letters stand for. MOOCs, they had a really quick rise, right? They were a great way to use this great new tool that we had available to us, the internet. However, they've somewhat fallen from grace. The article that is cited down here where this graph comes from attributes that to it didn't have a sufficient sustainable business model. I posit that it really had more to do with how we were using MOOCs. We were still teaching the same way it was always done, one-way communication from a talking head on a screen to the students that are on the other side of that screen. It didn't take advantage of the interactive possibilities that this tool could provide. And there are, however, we're really lucky because there are a few innovative teachers out there, but they are not the norm. One of my favorite examples of innovative and collaborative teaching, which actually came from that book that I mentioned earlier, The New Education by Kathy Davidson, is where a group of students in an their introduction to basic science, they were trying to come up with a solution for for how science could help patients begin to regain bodily control after a stroke. I don't know about you guys, but in my introductory basic science course, that is not stuff that we tackled. They came up with an idea to use music to help guide the patients in learning how to move their bodies. If they were moving well, the music would flow and be really beautiful. If they started to jerk or go in a wrong direction, the music would become more discordant and less pleasant to listen to. And it was an audio trigger for them that they needed to readjust and go back to what they were doing before. The coolest part for me about this story is that the idea for this solution was actually inspired by a student who was studying musical conducting. Now, is that an area that you would think of going to try and find a solution to a healthcare problem? And yet, they came up with this really innovative solution that studies show actually worked to improve these patients' lives. We need to use all the tools and experiences available to us to explore and experiment, think beyond the test and the exam to really engage students in the research and knowledge process. I've had some folks respond to me when I've said that before. Well, not all students are going into careers in academia. That's okay. It doesn't matter whether you're going to have a future in academia or not. Research skills are no longer something just for people in academia. Collecting, verifying, synthesizing information is a skill that is critical to all of us today. How many of you have heard about this class that the title slide is from up there? A few of you, okay. You'll forgive me if I actually say the name of that class. So think about the news that we get today and how we get it. We hear the terms fake news and misinformation on a regular basis. It has led to classes, unfortunately necessary classes, like the University of Washington's course called Calling Bullshit, which is a course about how numbers, statistics, data visualization models, and algorithms are increasingly being used for propagating BS, and how people can detect it and avoid being taken in by those stories. It has also led to conferences like the one pictured below, which is coming up next week at MozFest, our annual Mozilla festival, which is called Misinfocon. And it's a summit that is designed to bring together journalists, technologists, and academics to figure out how to tackle the issues around fake news and the widespread of misinformation, particularly in online media. Instead of banning laptops and technology in the classroom, what if we can get the students using them openly to help them learn, preferably together? Discuss and question what they read in class together on a collaborative platform like Google Docs or Etherpad. Think about new modes of learning and assessing that learning is taking place. What if you brought students together, synchronously or asynchronously, it doesn't terribly matter, from different courses or even different disciplines, and you brought them together over the course of a semester, quarter, whatever system you're on, to tackle a problem together over that period of time? What if you had students share what they're doing and learning in class every week, and they submitted it not in a paper to you, a researcher or faculty member, whoever, for you to read on your own and grade? What if they put it in an online platform that the whole world could read? 10 years ago, next door at Kansas State, Michael Wesch led his class in the production of a video that's available on YouTube called A Vision of Students Today. They produced it as their, They produced it as their project for the course. This is the link to the video. You can watch it yourself. It's had over 5 million downloads. I won't go into too much detail about what it's about, but the students use Google Docs to collaboratively plan the film, which highlights, among other things, some of the issues in higher education, including tuition costs, juggling their job responsibilities, juggling their school responsibilities, sleeping, eating, getting on Facebook, because that's part of your job. It's shorter than 5 minutes, and the students also filmed and starred in the film. I really encourage you to check it out. This was a fun watch for me. And if you haven't already seen it, it really is a good eye-opening 5-minute intro into the state of higher education 10 years ago. I want to encourage you, so that was just one example, but I also want to encourage you to think about other ways. So embrace the hackathon as a method for learning and collaboration. Every year since 2014, Mozilla has held a worldwide event called the Global Sprint. It's a hybrid event of virtual and physical interaction. So I'm going to try and describe this. It's kind of hard to describe without experiencing it, but I'll do my best. Host sites around the world volunteer and sign up to be a physical space where people who want to participate in the Global Sprint can come and sit and they'll have internet access, maybe some coffee, maybe some food, maybe not, from 9 to 5 over 2 dedicated days. 9 to 5 in their particular time zone. This is a global event, so we're talking multiple time zones here. During that time, they hack, and the definition of hack is the one that I'm using up there at the top, on projects that were submitted by other people from around the world that wanted collaboration on their open projects. For 48 hours, or actually more like 53, 54 if you take into account the time zones, geographic barriers are dropped, and a culture of sharing and collaborating are a norm for 2 whole days. Through this activity, we build a community that continues on well past the event itself. We have people that come in and they worked on that project and they get so engaged and so involved, they officially become a part of that project, sometimes even being hired if it's a project that's got money to hire people. This year was the first year where we took the Global Sprint outside the Mozilla Science Lab. It was originally just a Mozilla Science Lab event. This year we made it a Mozilla-wide event. So we focused any project that was related to what we called the healthy and open internet was available for people to contribute. Staff from all across the organization encouraged their community members to submit projects. We had some really amazing projects, unlike any that we'd seen before. Just to give you a sample, one project's purpose was to develop a new role-playing adventure for a game that asks, what if dragons, elves, and dwarves had an internet of their own? Just thinking about that makes me smile. I love it. Another game that was created during the Global Sprint sought to raise awareness around privacy and security with the Internet of Things by developing an escape the room challenge in a room that was full of puzzles that were running off of connected devices. Another participant was looking to develop and generate ideas for an open source podcast. 2 participants partnered together to develop a workplace review platform for academia to try to make universities a more diverse and welcoming place. In a really relevant tool for our time, one participant wanted to help create a tool that works against echo chambers and makes it easier to promote civil discussion when people have opposing views. There were still plenty of science projects that were submitted. We had one participant from Brazil who wanted to create hands-on research to help others teach an R-based course for biological sciences. Another one of our repeat participants, someone who's actually participated in the Global Sprint since its inception, was looking for collaborators to help him develop an open platform for sharing genetic test results. The link at the bottom is a link to all the projects that were submitted in the most recent Global Sprint. It's completely open. You can go in there. You can look at all the projects. You can see our comments. You can, if you're familiar with GitHub, which many of you in the room now are, you can go in and look at those projects. You can go to the repositories. You can fork them. You can work on them. Please feel free to jump in. These methods that I've been describing employ project-based learning and cross-disciplinary skills building. They deepen learning and understanding of larger contexts. They provide a means for helping students make broader connections beyond their own studies and really apply them to the world at large. How many of you are familiar with Seymour Papert? Any of you heard of him? Okay, so more relevant in my world, I suppose, these days, is he was a real pioneer in artificial intelligence. And he was really well known for this, and he said that A teacher's role is to provide the conditions for invention. Kathy Davidson, the author of the book I've been talking about, stated that the goal of education is greater than workforce readiness. It's world readiness. Our goal should not be to provide an education that produces students with a narrow specialization in their field and an accompanying narrow concept for how they can impact that world. Think about our world today and how it has changed in the last 150 years. Are we educating students today in a way that prepares them for the world that they're going to graduate into? Finally, I am going to encourage you, please think outside your institution, think outside academia, your profession, when you are thinking about support and looking for support in this area. There are a lot of folks that you may not realize want to help. We have Mozilla, of course. There's the Center for Open Science, Creative Commons, the Wiki Education Foundation. How many of you have heard of the Open Research Funders Group? Aside from those that were in the workshop. A couple, okay, good. So the Open Research Funders Group, for those of you who don't know, are a coalition of private funders who have come together to form a group to support open practices in research. They include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They include the Leona Helmsley Charitable Trust. It includes the Sloan Foundation, the American Heart Association, and a whole bunch of others. There is money that is looking to support this kind of activity. So there are a ton of us on the outside that are looking to jump in, and this slide is only a few of them. All right. This part might be a little hard for me, so bear with me. I have been learning a lot lately, and we practiced this in our workshop for the last couple days, the power of storytelling. I was going to say most of you are here, have not met me, but yes, most of you actually have. You have patiently sat here and listened to me talk and go on about the need for more open in research and education. So I am going to share my story, and yes, I realize this is being recorded and going out into the world. That's okay. I want to make clear why this is so important to me personally and to others around the world with similar stories. When I was 30 years old, so I'd lived a good chunk of my life, I was diagnosed with diabetes. Because of my age at the time of onset, there was an assumption that it was type 2 diabetes, and all I needed to do was exercise more and eat less. All right, fine. I tried that. It didn't work. We didn't discover until a couple years later that I actually had something that was called late onset type 1 diabetes. No amount of exercise or changing my diet was going to change the fact that I had diabetes. Now, as someone who has lived most of her life considering herself a foodie, the only thinking about food that I had at the time was in terms of A, how good it tasted, B, whether I could make it at home, and C, how much exercise I would need to compensate for it. This whole new world was very challenging for me to handle. I was having to live my life very differently. Think of every plate of food, every bite of food, in terms of how many grams of carbs is in this, how many grams of fat. What is the ratio of the carbs to the fat? How long was it going to be for the fat to slow down the sugar affecting my glucose levels? How much insulin did I need to inject now versus later to keep my blood sugar from going too high, or worse, going too low and killing me in my sleep? I struggled with this a lot. After 10 years of having this disease and not really being able to control my blood sugar, thanks to the benefits that I have at Mozilla, and I feel eternally grateful for this, I was actually able to go out and purchase a continuous glucose monitor. Yes, purchase, because insurance would not cover it. That's this little device right here. Actually, mine is a newer model. It sits right here. Every 5 minutes, it tracks what my blood sugar is, and it sends it to my phone. So I know every 5 minutes where my blood sugar is, what direction it's going. It collects a lot of data. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every 5 minutes. I have data. I also know what I've been eating. I sort of have an idea of the carbs and the fat that are related to it. I'm working on that part still. I still struggle with this tool, but I was able to drop my A1C 3 points in 3 months because I had this tool. For those of you that don't know diabetes, that is huge. Now here's where I have some conflicts, because while I am an open data advocate, I'm also a privacy advocate. There are times that those two parts of me come into conflict. Here's what I'm going to say about this. I will gladly, joyfully, ecstatically give up my privacy and health data to anyone who thinks that they can use it to find a cure, find some treatment to make life easier for those of us with this condition. Your student, if you're a student, great, I'll give it to you. Work with other students, collaborate. See, that's the caveat, and you knew there was going to be one, right? The caveat is that if I provide this, you must then do your work in the open. You must share all the data that I provide to you openly with other people. And I will go further. I will talk to my endocrinologists. I will talk to my other diabetes friends, other people wearing CGMs, and ask if they're willing to give up their data. If there is any way, shape, or form where I can give up my privacy in order to make this happen, I will do it. Okay. When I say sharing openly, this is the definition that I mean, okay? People have to be able to access it, they have to be able to use it, they gotta be able to modify it, they gotta be able to share it, all the things. We have been waiting for a really long time for a cure to this problem. Most folks have been waiting longer than I have. I've only had to deal with it for the last years. I told you when I started, so I can't tell you the end. This isn't about making one person famous. It isn't even really about me wanting a solution to my problem, although I do. This is about changing the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. So I was told to come up and moderate a question and answer session. I don't know how much moderation you're all going to need, but I can.
They're a rowdy bunch. I've been in with them for the last couple of days.
Well, you know better than I. A lot of them actually work in the library, so I know how rowdy they are. Anyway, so I can pass the microphone, but if you have questions or things you want to say. I don't know if we need this, but I'll bring it.
For the camera. Okay. So I'm wondering if you can speak some to the issue of what is holding up universities and higher ed in kind of fully implementing a vision where the processes of the universities, specifically around research and scholarship, are leaning more toward open or even reach some kind of blue sky thinking about open so that those benefits, those inventions, those discoveries can happen. What's holding us up, and where are pain points and ways of perhaps making things better? Oh, and I'm Ada from the libraries.
Thanks, Ada. There are a lot of different factors. I'm going to focus on one. And I'm going to go back to something that I addressed a little bit in the talk. It really is the tenure and promotion process. We are not incentivizing people in the correct way to make open the default. We are making it so if you want tenure and promotion, you have to rack up those publications. You need to, in some disciplines, some departments, you have to be lead author. If you're not the first name on that paper, it doesn't count. When we're talking about working more openly in terms of research, we are talking about being willing to contribute to a larger project that's beyond just you. You're not going to be the only name on the paper. You're not going to be the only one listed on that project. Something that we could do about it, and we talked about a little bit in the workshop, was what if we created roles for different people that could be attributed to in papers and in projects in research. So say this was the data collector, this person collected all the data. And whatever those roles are, they have different values towards the tenure and promotion process. That way, you would still get credit, you would still get that goal of the tenure and promotion that you're looking for, but you wouldn't have to be the only one. You wouldn't have to be working in a silo. One of the issues that came up in the Working Open workshop quite a bit, and it comes up in a lot of these conversations, is people are afraid of scooping for that exact reason. When we drilled down, it wasn't so much, oh, well, somebody wrote a paper before I did. Okay, so you didn't write there's one publication you didn't write. That's not the problem. The problem is that you need those publications so that you can keep your job, so that you can succeed in your career. We need to find ways that you get credit for that and that you're incentivized to be willing to be something other than maybe the lead author on the paper, the person that writes the words. That's okay. So where's the challenge in that? Why haven't we fixed it? Why can't we just change it? Because there is no central body or central standard for the tenure and promotion process. This tenure and promotion process are decided at institutions, departments. Some professional societies have certain standards, but for the most part, there is no one standard that anybody follows. There's nobody that we can go to, no organization that we can say, hey, you guys need to change this and fix this. It's really up to those of you that are in the trenches, I'm sorry to say. Does that answer your question?
Could I contribute a comment there,
Please.
which is, I think, another group that can influence this is funders. And sometimes I think that the push to move, to get that article in Nature or whatever it is as much about getting funding as it is about promotion and tenure. And often that's what university administrations care most about. So, for example, the Spark has decided to address a lot of its attention to funders as, I think, an important move.
I thank you for bringing that up.
My pleasure.
As I've been saying in the workshop, I'll slip you your 20 later. Spark is exactly a good person or a good organization to talk about, because Spark, Heather Joseph, who's the director of Spark, was actually one of the primary drivers behind the Open Research Funders Group happening. And I want to let you all know that I can say this, right? I'm trying to remember what the rules were for confidentiality in that meeting. Yes, tenure promotion came up as one of the biggest reasons and biggest blockers to being able to promote open research and fund it. There's that hesitation from faculty. We understand that, and when I say we, I'm talking in my role as a funder. But again, it gets back to who do we talk to? What can we do about it? We're happy to provide support and try and make the change there, but how do we do it? Tell me. I'll take it back to them. I have no problem doing that. I talk a lot.
Other questions, comments?
Thank you. So, Steph, you're the first person that we've had for an Open Access Week speaker, at least since I got here. This is my third year, who was previously part of the Academy, but shifted to an outside of the Academy position, or maybe you think of that as an alt-ac position, or that's a fascinating shift to me, because from within our bubble, it's fascinating to me to leave once you're in and you were tenured and had a successful career there. But maybe beyond that, I guess my question is, what is it like to talk about open outside of these traditional academic spaces? So you run in startup culture and in nonprofit cultures that have connections to the Academy but aren't the Academy. Yeah. And so I know what these conversations look like within the Academy, but what do they look like in your circulating outside of the Academy?
So first I want to say, I mentioned that I encourage you to look outside academia for support on this. I will also admit that there is a responsibility of those of us outside academia to think about partnering with people inside academia for this. We need to do a better job of that. So I will say that as well before I start. So the conversations are very different. Life is very different. When I was in academia, I was at a public institution, I was a librarian. I had the mindset of, oh my God, I know what open is. You know, information is free, everybody get access to the information. I had no clue what open was. I thought I had a really good idea of what the open data landscape was, because that was my specialty within the libraries. I thought I knew who the movers and shakers were in open data. My first day at Mozilla, I had a meeting with my boss, and she says, okay, we brought you on to create this open data training program. Who are the people that we should be talking to? I said, oh, well, I know this researcher in Australia, and they're really good, and I know this librarian in the UK, we should really talk to them. And, you know, there's this person that's at University of Michigan who's doing some really interesting stuff, and she's finding it interesting, she's nodding her head, she's, uh-huh. Okay, so this is the Chief Information Officer at the White House, this is their email address. This is the first person who is leading the Wikimedia Foundation, this is how you can get in touch with them. I'm like, oh! This is a much bigger world than I realized in terms of what the possibilities are in collaboration and working with people to solve these complex problems. That was really, really eye-opening to me. The other thing that it took a long time for me to grasp was how quickly these organizations outside academia move and work. And here's where I'm going to tell you another story. December, 3 months after I started at Mozilla, every year we have 2 meetings where we bring everyone at Mozilla together. It's over 1,000 people. And in one location, and we work for a week. We call them all hands work weeks, where we work with people across the organization to advance our mission. Our team was, it happened to be in Orlando, so we're sitting by the pool. We were sitting by the pool, and we had just led this event that we called the Open Leadership Summit, where we were testing out bringing people that we'd already identified as leaders in the open science community, to come and work with us and get some more basic training in how to work openly and how to train others to work openly. It was good, people liked it. But we felt like we needed to do more. It wasn't enough. It was like, here, you've done the workshop, now you're done, okay. We decided what you needed to do was to have this big kickoff workshop that we designed, and we also wanted to follow it up with 12 to 14 weeks of one-on-one mentorship to actually help these people advance their projects to a point where they could make a difference and submit it to some of the other events that we have. That was December. February, we ran the first version of that event in Berlin, where we flew people in from all over the world to participate. That was at a pace that never occurred to me within academia. And I'm going to tell you a quote from one of our fellows from last year when she and I were working on some data refuge events. And we were talking about, well, why are these data refuge events so popular? Why are they working? And Danielle said, the reason that this is working in the open source community is we hack. In the startup culture, we have this hacking culture. You don't hack in academia, you form subcommittees. That's a very real reason why things were so different in those worlds. Does that give you some answer to your question, Josh?
Yeah, I think so. So, like, follow-up question.
Okay.
Thinking of data refuges, and in the context in which those became important, I wonder about your perspective on the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion in open spaces.
I'm gonna wait, don't give the mic back. I'm gonna ask you a question. I wanna hear more because diversity and inclusion is a really big, has a lot of parts, and when people say diversity and inclusion, it can mean a bunch of different things.
I mean specifically social justice issues.
Okay.
The way that race and gender and sexuality, et cetera, move through this community.
There it is. There was actually a really good Twitter discussion about this recently, and I fell on the side that wasn't in agreement with the original poster. Looking at this umbrella for open science, you'll see that we include under the umbrella equity, diversity, and inclusion. And And it's one of the 5 core tenets of internet health that Mozilla has and that we focus on for our mission for the open internet. The whole point is to make life more equitable for everybody that's in it. That's, for me, if you're doing open and that's not your point, then is it really open? And that was the point of this Twitter conversation. It was like, well, you can have open access, or you can make software free. It doesn't necessarily have to be about making it more equal for everybody to access and do this. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. I disagree. Well, I shouldn't say you're wrong. I disagree. I think that that really is the whole point. Does that answer that part?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else? Anything else you want to say, ask, object?
Take me on. I'm for it. Prove me wrong.
So I have a question about some of these different cultural contexts you referenced. I think you mentioned UK and Berlin. And I'm curious to hear about how open access looks different. There might be some similarities across the world, but what are different issues that crop up when you're working in different countries?
Solutions, I'm not sure I can provide solutions, but I can definitely tell you about how different it looks and what, how we address those when we go to those different areas. We have a localization team at Mozilla that works on localizing our projects, but within the foundation and within the Science Lab and the things that we do, for those of you that were at the workshop, I'm going to refer to something. For those of you that weren't there, I'm sorry. You can talk to your colleagues. They'll tell you all about it. Remember that visioning exercise that we did where we were like, what does open look like to you? Part of the reason that we asked that question is because open looks very different to everybody depending on their context. For example, in June, we did a mini working open workshop in Cape Town, South Africa. And the whole point of that, we knew that there were going to be challenges there that were not challenges for us in the United States or even for our colleagues in the UK. We knew that the best people to tell us what their challenges were the people that were in the room. That's why we did that visioning exercise, because we wanted to know what their challenges were. Even once they tell us what those challenges are, they are still the best people to determine what's the correct solution and what can they actually do to fix that problem. So that's what it looks like for us. It isn't for us to come down on high from our ivory tower, go visit, the global south and say, this is how it should be done. That's not going to do anything for anyone. We're not the experts in South Africa. The people that are there on the ground, the researchers, the librarians, the students on the ground in South Africa are the ones that are the experts. And we look at our role as being a supportive role and helping them figure that out, not to tell them what to do. Does that answer? Okay.
All the questions have come from this side. I'm willing to travel. I'm willing to travel if you have questions over on the other side or comments you want to make.
To be fair, the ratio of people on this side to that side is skewed.
It's true. I just didn't want them to think that distance was an obstacle here.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you got to talk into the mic. Sorry.
It's okay. Could you point to an example outside of Mozilla that you'd say has really great open data practices?
There are a lot. And when I say that, I mean, do I think that there's any one person that's really doing the whole thing right? No. But there are a lot of people who are doing a bunch of different things in really great ways that could be utilized by other people. In the United States, I love what University of Michigan's been doing in terms of open data. I love what Purdue has done in terms of the data curation profiles and really understanding the researchers. I love what the California Digital Library has been doing in terms of creating tools like the data management profile tool to try and help researchers create DMPs that are now required by NSF and NIH and other organizations. a lot of the really valuable big policy open data changes are unfortunately happening outside the United States. And this was true even when I started in the research data management world 10 years ago. I think the leaders in this area are really more along the lines of those in UK and Australia, where they have national policies that are enforced around open data. Mm-hmm.
If I wait long enough.
We can also talk during the reception. You don't have to, if you're shy and don't want to talk into the mic, I'm happy to keep going on.
Well, will you join me in thanking Stephanie then?